Hey everyone, Brian from All Day Ruckoff here, and today's podcast episode is with Cadre Belman. We talk about how Cadre Belman got involved with GORUCK, his first event, the events he likes to run, and then we get into the current state of GORUCK events. GORUCK has started running events in some cities. The packing list has been updated. It now includes masks, it includes hand sanitizer. And in this episode, we talk about the precautions that are being taken, what's happening at the events, what you can expect if you show up to an event currently. If you're listening to this around the time it's released, right now, a lot of states, at least the United States, are easing up on their lockdowns. We're actually going the complete opposite direction in Washington this coming Friday, which is tomorrow. If you're listening to this on release date, masks are becoming mandatory inside, and I believe they're optional outside unless you're not able to social distance 6 feet, and then they're mandatory. So we're heading the opposite direction over here, but some states are opening up or fully opening up. And so we talk about the GORUCK events that are happening in those states. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a virologist. I'm not a pandemic expert. So I can't say for sure how safe anything is to do right now because I just don't know. With that being said, GORUCK events are being run. Other events are starting up again too. And so I thought it would be nice to have a cadre on to talk about what's happening at the events. So if you're someone who's thinking that they want to do a GORUCK event soon, they can know what to expect. You're listening to the All Day Ruckoff podcast, episode number 159. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you for downloading this episode. Truly appreciate it. Cadre Belman, thank you again for taking the time to be on with me. Hope to talk to you again in a future episode. And here is the interview with Cadre Belman. Today, I'm talking with Cadre Belman. Really, really excited to have him on the podcast. We're going to talk about how he got involved with GORUCK, his first event, the events he likes to run, and then kind of this whole during/post-COVID startup of GORUCK events again. Cadre Belman, how you doing today?
I am doing great. Happy to be here.
Thank you again for taking the time. I know it's a busy time of year. Everyone's got a lot going on, so I appreciate this.
That's no problem. We're sort of living in the world still of more Zoom calls and working from home. So this fits right in with what my daily routine has become.
Yeah, funny how it's kind of all shifted this way.
Yeah. And we've opened up here where we are in Tennessee, or just we're in a suburb of Nashville, actually, right where we ran the HTL recently, and it's opened up probably a little faster than other places, but it's still mostly no travel, mostly working from home, not doing a whole lot other than just sort of social stuff here locally.
I'm out just 20 miles or so north of Seattle, and we're still very much closed. I think we're still groups of people gathering. It's 5 or less.
Wow.
We're going slow.
Wow. Well, we haven't seen, maybe we've seen a little bit of an uptick, but we're probably one of those states that's on the list of getting scolded for not being fully locked down. But yeah, we're pretty much, Nashville proper is still a little more locked down than we are, but there's no really policing of groups. There's some people wear masks, some don't. The restaurants are open, except for sort of smaller format like fast food or Chipotle is all carry out or drive through. But there's some places you go and you just can't even tell if there was anything happening. So whether that's going to end up being a smart move or not, we'll see. But it's sort of the lay of the land here.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are kind of watching to see where it's going, and it's funny how quickly you can get back into the routine from how things were before.
Yes, I think it's funny. I think the same reasons that people were slow to go into kind of the mindset of this is a real thing is the same same reason it's almost easy to go back as if you people, it's human beings tend to take cues from what's going on immediately around them. And yes, the news and watching all that stuff has an impact as well. But if you start seeing other people acting normal, you're going to feel normal again, unless you've had a significant experience directly with, say, COVID yourself, or you were in the middle of New York City or something like that. And just like when the lockdowns were starting, and you could see kind of the dominoes falling on that, and yet people were still going to their gyms or the grocery store or whatever, because they just saw everybody who behaving normally sort of before the walls came down. And so I think that that human beings are like that, right? They take their cues from that sort of tribe and that sort of social feeling that they're getting, just observing and being around or not being around other people. So here it's very much kind of like you see a mask or here or there, but it's not, you don't have that feeling of like strict social distancing and strict kind of, self-policing, so to speak.
Right, right. And I thought it was, pretty interesting out here when this whole thing started. GORUCK canceled their Tough and a Light for a weekend. And I remember thinking, that's interesting because, no other events have really been canceled yet. And they're, pretty preventative in announcing it a couple days before. But then it was supposed to be that Friday and Saturday. And then that coming Monday, it was, governor got on, it was strict lockdown and everything changed. I was thinking, wow.
It's interesting that you talk, and I can talk a little bit about. I had a very surreal experience that week, which was the week of, I want to say, March 13th. So earlier that week, and I'm trying to remember exactly the things that were happening. Like, when did the NBA cancel? So a lot of things were sort of on the verge of happening, but hadn't. And I want to say this was probably the Sunday prior to that weekend of events. I was due to go do a Tough Light in Minneapolis. And my wife's family's from Minnesota. So my wife and son were going to come along, and so she was going to visit family. And so it was just the weekend before, and I get a call from my brother who lives in Hong Kong. So he, and is obviously, being in Hong Kong, much more connected with what's going on. He says, John, or he didn't call me Cadre Belman, he called me John. But hey, John, can you please call Mom and Dad and tell them to stop doing what they're doing, because in a week's time, what they're doing will look insane. And he and I don't talk a whole lot on the phone because of the time difference and him being abroad and all the rest of it. But this was sort of never asked me to do anything like this before. My parents live in DC, and they were out doing stuff, going to, social activities. My mom is a tour guide at the Library of Congress, and she was giving tours. And my brother is like, look, things are really going to change in a week, and you got to stop them, because my parents are in their 80s. And so they're high risk for this. And so I called them and said, hey, you guys need to back off. And everything was normal in their world. And then 2 days later, everything shut down. But I was looking ahead to whether I was going to go to Minnesota. So if I'm before that call, I'm on board. We knew some things were happening, but I was still planning to go and bring the family. So first I had my wife and son said, pretty much, you guys shouldn't travel. So they waved off. And then I just kept keeping very close track of things. And then that Thursday or Friday, I ended up making the call, and I was saying, hey, I just don't think we should run the event. I don't want to get stuck in an airport. I don't want to, too many things are up in the air about what's going to happen. We probably could have done the event, but at the time I kind of pulled off on that. And then I was actually supposed to go to Seattle the following Thursday and do a custom tough for 2nd Ranger Battalion. So not the battalion I was in when I was in the Army, but the Ranger Regiment. So that was basically the parent, my same unit effectively. And they had wanted to do a custom GORUCK. They had a custom GORUCK tough event that Thursday. And I had already been talking to them saying, I don't think this thing is going to go. But, and as it happens, we ended up canceling it. But it's amazing. It's kind of really interesting how fast, it's hard to remember just how fast things went from normal to, we have no idea what's happening, and this thing could be one of the worst things to ever hit our country since the 1918 flu. And it's been bad, but it hasn't been as bad as what people were talking about then. And so that whole transition period, I'll never forget.
You're right. Talking about that, it went so quick. I mean, just the course of a week. And then I remember we were thinking we had some plans, we were traveling 2 months later for a wedding that we wanted to go to. We're like, oh, well, of course, we'll be going to that wedding. And then the wedding's canceled. Right.
Yeah.
Like, gosh, sure hope this doesn't, impact our plans at the end of April or early May. And it's just, gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been really interesting to watch just kind of how everything's changed, since it happened, especially in the event space.
Yeah.
Everyone's been shutting down events for this time. And now it's, people are starting them back up again. And so
right.
I definitely want to get into the HTL you ran, but before we get into that, haven't had you on the podcast before. So I would like to hear, how you got involved with GORUCK and kind of how you became a cadre.
Okay, sure. So so my military background was in the 75th Ranger Regiment, 3rd Ranger Battalion. And I was in only for a little bit in the 90s, but I did go to combat to Mogadishu in 1993. So I ended up going to a GORUCK event to speak at a Mogadishu Mile event in Atlanta in October of 2016. I didn't know I happened to have a rucker that I had bought to do rucking on my own, but I literally had no idea about what GORUCK was. I didn't even make the connection really initially, but we had there's a group of us who are affiliated with the Three Rangers Foundation, and they had an agreement with GORUCK that GORUCK would donate a portion of the proceeds from the events to the foundation. In exchange, the foundation would scare up some of us, old guys from the old days, Somalia days, to go out and speak at these GORUCK events. And this was, so they sort of sent the word out, can somebody cover Atlanta? I was like, sure, okay. And then, the weekend was upcoming, and I started getting in touch with the two cadre, which were Cadre Heath and Cadre Machine. And I really, when I first got it, I thought seriously I'd be coming in, be like a Spartan race, and there's like a podium and you go speak, and then so I had no idea what I was getting into. But then I started talking to these guys, got a feel for it, and I ended up showing up at the end of the heavy, and then stayed for the whole tough, and then stayed for as much of the light as I could. And then I had to go down to actually Fort Benning, where 3rd Ranger Battalion is located. Every year they actually do a Mogadishu Mile 5K, and I went and ran in that. It was pretty tired that whole weekend, so I went and ran the 5K. But I really was just impressed by just what GORUCK was all about. The people who showed up and did the events, the two, Meet and Heath and Machine, just was fabulous. And they were like, at the end of it, they were like, hey, you got to think about being a cadre. And I was like, okay, what does that involve? And I got hooked up with, they said, well, you got to go, we'll recommend you. And the Machine did a nice write-up and sent it to headquarters. And then Mocha Mike Vox got in touch with me and said, hey, let's send me your background stuff. You got to go do a tough. So I went and did his tough as a participant in Atlanta. Cadre Dan was my cadre for that. And it was interesting. In that class, there's a lot of sort of GORUCK celebrities, including Doug Schwerin, the selection finisher, Brian Singelin from Kark, and a couple other folks who were sort of very, very, seasoned senior, in a good way, GRTs. And of course, I didn't know it at the time. I really knew very little about it, but I went and did the event. It was a great experience. Dan brought plenty of stuff for us to carry, and then been doing events ever since. My first solo event as a cadre was in Birmingham in January or February of 2017. And have been doing, I think I'm well over 120 total events now since that time.
That's a lot of events. And I mean,
yeah,
it doesn't sound like you had any idea it was going to turn into that when you showed up to speak at that Mogadishu Mile event years ago.
No clue. Did not. I had no. Yeah, because when I showed up, I barely knew what it was about. And then, it becomes, being a the role of cadre really fills, it fills a hole you don't, that at least for me, that I didn't know I had. And I've been out of the military for a long time. So the ability to go and meet other cadre from similar backgrounds, and also just meet with the GRTs, help teach, build, do team building, get that experience. It's pretty addictive. The only people, my wife sometimes doesn't love it, but it's an experience that I really am happy I've been able to be a part of and be able to go and do.
It's great to hear. And so that first event that you signed up for, I mean, you must have had somewhat of an idea of what was going to happen, because you had shadowed the end of the heavy, the tough, and I think you said most of the light. So it's not like you went into that first event without knowing what could happen. Is there anything that you did, training up for that first event for you? Or did you just kind of tackle it going in?
Well, I was kind of like, I shadowed a lot of so I'd seen what was going on, but when you've never, even coming into shadow and sort of guest cadre a little, coming totally new to it, you're there more around just observing just getting to say, wow, what are all these people doing? And then speaking and talking with the cadre, and you're not really looking at it as a cadre or as a participant, really, what am I doing and what can I expect? So when I went in, and as far as training, I was doing some rucking, going to the gym, doing things like that, but I had not, I had not trained specifically for being a participant in a GORUCK event. I mean, I did do some. I think I did the downloadable program. I may have looked at Pathfinder or something too. I just don't recall. But I didn't do a ton of specific training for it. And so when I showed up, I didn't really know what to expect. And then I saw what Dan was offloading from the back of his truck, and I was equal parts horrified and then comfortable, because I knew, well, I can see where this is going to go. It's just going to be miserable and carrying a bunch of stuff, which is what ended up happening. It was just a super heavyweight event, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was kind of in my wheelhouse. So I think now that I look back on it, and having cadre events so many now myself, I'm like, man, if it had been, with a different type of setup where it had been like, 400 8-count bodybuilders or something, I'd have been really hurting doing that. But it was hard enough on its own. So,
and that's one of the things that's so fun about GORUCK events. I mean, it can be that. It can be slow and heavy, just a ton of weight. Your first movements to the cadre's truck, and there's just a ton,
exactly.
a ton of stuff back there. Or it can be a lighter and a lot more PT. I mean, that's brutal in a whole nother way. So you never really know what to expect showing up.
Yeah.
So you started out kind of shadowing those events, having that outside perspective looking in. Then you are a participant in that GORUCK Tough event. After that event, did you participate in any other events, or have you just been cadring since then?
I didn't. And mainly it's just because I kind of got into, I want to try to be a cadre. I want to do I want to cadre as many events as I can. Right. So it ends up being a trade-off between cadreing a lot of events, and then on top of that, being gone to do another event as a participant just wasn't really in the cards. And I was like, you know what, I can justify going and being, just cadreing as much as I do. But then if I start getting into doing the events, then it's just going to become like a full-time obsession. So, I haven't, no, I just did that one. I know there's some guys who do events as participants or before they became cadre, like Cadre Fagan, I know, was a participant. Did a lot of them, I think, as a participant. Some other guys have off and on, but I've just mainly stuck to doing just being the cadre.
And that makes a lot of sense, because if you're out there participating at an event, I mean, that's an event, you're spending the same amount of time. You're there for it.
Right.
You're not getting paid,
right.
And you're not leading in an event. It's kind of like how I look at shadowing events. Sometimes if I'm not able to do the full event, then I'll show up and take some pictures, but I'm not one who's going to shadow an entire event, because at the end of it, I'll think, well, I should have just done it and earned a patch.
Right. Now I shadowed an event, I think one or two when I was in Atlanta, because we moved from Atlanta in August of 2017 to Nashville, just by way of background. But I shadowed one with Jerry Jordan, was where JC was running one down there. And so I'd worked an event with him before. My first sort of training event was he and Flash for the Cadre for that. So I've shadowed sometimes, but I've not done it. Shadowed one with good old ex-Cadre Chad in Chicago, just because we were both. I was working those Clearfield scavengers. And he was doing a double tough in Chicago, so went out and just hung out for a while. But I mean that's kind of fun too. But shadowing the whole thing, and especially if you're a GRT and shadowing the whole thing, you might as well have done the event by that time.
Yeah, because if you're a cadre out there shadowing, I mean, at least you can get buddy and talk to the other cadre who's there running the event.
Right.
But if you're a shadow and you're the only one, I mean, usually it's frowned upon if you get in there and talk with the participants.
Yeah.
The idea of a shadow is to be a shadow.
Yeah, that's a no. Yes, that is sort of the shadow etiquette page has got obviously first and foremost don't become the cadre, and then I have other suggestions for shadows too, both positive and negative, but we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. But
yeah, so you've run over 100 events. Is there an event that you gravitate towards? Do you like running the HTLs? I mean, it sounds like you've run all the way to those Operation Clearfields, those kind of scavenger ingress events. So it sounds like the full gamut.
I love doing HTLs. I've done probably over 20 heavies, and probably half to maybe 60% of those were HTLs. I have to go back and count. Love doing HTLs. The ability to spend, the heavy in itself is just great, because you have so much time to work with and really get to know the people. The HTL weekend is a very efficient use of your time too. And working with other cadres is great. I mean, I think obviously the guy I've worked with by far the most is Cadre Cleve, and I have worked a ton of events together, particularly HTLs. And I just love that experience doing those. By far my favorite.
So then to follow up on there, I mean, I guess I kind of have to ask, HTLs have been a standard format up until kind of this year, where it was a heavy event, a tough event, a light event. You could sign up for one, two, or all three. Then for 2020, HTL became this package event where you sign up for the HTL. There's no just the tough, just the light. And it sounds like, based on visiting GORUCK's event website and seeing how it's kind of manifested for 2020, that a lot of them have broken back out to this original heavy, tough, light standard.
Yes.
So I'm curious, what your thoughts are on the differences between those two events.
I do have a take, but I first will say is I believe, pretty confident that we have moved fully back to the old format, which includes taking some of, if not all, but at least some of the standalone heavies and making them into HTL. So this one which we'll get to later, of course, this one we just ran in Nashville was HTL. Originally was supposed to be the do all three, right? Or no patch. But then it was not. It was opened up to allow people to do the traditional a la carte approach of pick whichever events you want to do, and then if you do all three, you get the traditional HTL patch. As far as what I think about it, I understand what GORUCK was trying to do, which was to 2019. Let me back up here. 2019 in particular was it was wonderful from a cadre perspective. We just had, I did 9 HTLs in 2019, just to give you a perspective. So we had a ton of HTLs on the calendar, which is really great from a cadre standpoint. But the challenge for GORUCK as a company is, when you put that many events out there, and it wasn't just HTLs, you have a challenge with getting attendance, getting people to show up. That's both from a financial standpoint on the HTL weekend, because you've got 2 cadre there. So if you have low numbers, it can turn that thing upside down. plus the whole, I don't want to get into all this because I'm not an expert on this, but the whole voucher thing and all the rest of it, where people were, using a lot of credits. And again, I don't want to get into that whole conversation because again, I really don't know much about it, but the combination of low attendance numbers plus credits being used means that, a lot of these events either got canceled, didn't make any money, or if they did go, and I had a couple that were in this category, the numbers were extremely low. We did an event with ex-Cadre Hot Mike or Mike Stewart, and I had a HTL in Charlotte. And I think I had 3 events in 2019 HTLs in Charlotte alone out of I think a total of 5. So you imagine one market with 5 HTLs in a year is considerable. And we had an event where, for the heavy, this was Red Wings of last year. So July, he had a heavy, 5 people who had, none of whom had done a heavy before showed up. And it's brutally hot, and Mike Stewart is probably the most challenging cadre was on the GORUCK roster in terms of it being a very serious, hard event. And you already knew from the beginning that you got 5 people there. It's very hot. It's likely you're going to drop some people almost right away. What do you do with that? So it ends up, not only is it that the events get canceled, it's also that when they do go off, they're not a great experience for the people who do show up. So I think with that background, GORUCK was taking a look at 2020 and saying, let's make HTLs kind of a more of a special event. And so they wanted to do fewer of them. And then I think the additional idea was to have it be this new thing to kind of reinvigorate interest. Maybe you get 60 or more people to show up. And it's kind of a new take on the HTL. I think with what, it's hard to determine, like, okay, what's happened with all the different things that have affected attendance and events, including COVID and all the rest of it. But I think the downside, my opinion, is the downside on a all-in-one HTL is you do have even more challenge getting the numbers up because you make it very difficult for people who just want to come and do the tough or the light, and you also, or just the heavy, and you also, how do you tell somebody who does the heavy, crushes it, does the tough, crushes it, and has like a minor injury and they can't do the light and they get no patch? It ends up being, a little bit, I think it's just a little difficult there. And I think with things like the double heavy, which I've done a double heavy before too, the double heavy offers that outlet for somebody who really wants to do, the top level, serious, hardcore, maybe, a couple notches below selection type event, go do double heavy. But an HTL, I think keeping it open and letting people come in and do whichever piece of the HTL they want to do is probably the best way of making it a sustainable thing. And I think a lot of people like that. So that's just my take anyway.
I think that's a really good take. I mean, I see, all the points that you brought up, and am glad, although I'm not signed up for it, but I am glad that GORUCK has a double heavy on the calendar this year, because I think that's going to be really exciting to watch, more so than some of the other events because it's so new. But, I had a lot of the same feelings that you probably had when they announced that combined HTL. And it almost made me wonder if doing something like an HTL Plus, where that's what it is, it's all 3 events in one, but, maybe you run one of them a year at one location, kind of like what they do with team assessment and selection. And you can get a, film crew in there, make a big deal out of it, and people can tune in and watch it. But I know there's a lot of people who want to, train up for the HTL, but it's tough, especially when you go from, like you said, 5 events in one market. I mean, you looked at some of those weekends from last year, some of those big weekends had 3 or 4 HTLs in different cities on the same weekend. And then you looked at 2020 and there's 3 HTLs total.
Yeah. It was a big, 2020, even before all of the, before the COVID shutdown, obviously the calendar was much, much reduced. And also the pivot to, really working with ruck clubs to do the scheduling and layout, which again, I haven't really been involved with, so can't really speak to the kind of details of how all that went, but it's a different it's a different way of doing it. And again, it makes sense that if you want to have events that get good attendance, you have partnership with the folks who are in those local areas, and you can help kind of, generate enthusiasm and make the events their own. I think was the intent. But it's just a lot. 2020 was just very different.
I think 2020 was a lot more different than probably most people were expecting. If anyone
Yes.
could have anticipated this, I mean,
Oh, I know.
you got a sick imagination.
Oh, yes. I think, yes, the fact that we're sort of, again, in the end of days type environment rolling into 2020 where, maybe it, as a cadre or as a GRT, you were looking at 2020 through a GORUCK lens and going, what about this? And where's the event in this town? Or I really want to go do that. Or I'm excited about Star Course or, typical stuff. And then boom, here we are. Are we ever going to be able to do events again? And what else is going on more broadly in the country, of course.
Right. There's a lot going on, which
Yes.
even just saying that's probably an understatement. It's even more than a lot.
Right.
So we hit, like you said, COVID-19. Your event shut down. The event out in Seattle shut down. The custom you're going to do in Seattle shut down. Events for GORUCK, except for a couple initial star courses I think happened, but then even those kind of puttered away. Everything's kind of been shut down until a week and a half ago, I believe is the time frame, and that's when you ran the HTL.
Yes. Yeah. So, coming into that, GORUCK just had, it was just like, the rest of us, every business and every organization and every individual was looking at, okay, what are we going to be able to do? What can we do safely? When can we start back up again? So GORUCK first initially canceled events and then revisited, I want to say in mid-May to say, okay, are we a go on the events for June? And initially, I want to say, I don't know how many cities were a go, but obviously Nashville, HTL was on the list. And fortunately enough, I'm local, and Cadre Hand, who was another Mogadishu veteran recently. We now have 4 guys who came to GORUCK as Cadre now, who did what I did and spoke at events, and then ended up getting suckered in and became Cadre. So Aaron Hand was the most recent of those, and so he's in Clarksville, which is about 45 minutes outside of Nashville. So he and I were the Cadre foot, so we were local. Right away, just in compliance with what GORUCK's policy was, and based on kind of what the lockdown situation was, where we are out here versus what's going on downtown Nashville, decided to move the event or just have the start point be in a suburb called Hendersonville, which is very basically it's where I live. Because again, the county that we're in was opening up more quickly. It was an area where coordination with local police was very solid, and it would be a favorable environment for us to do the event. Then, the next wild card hit, which was obviously with the awful killing of George Floyd, and that, creating an entirely different dynamic across the country. So, the concern there shifted. All the while it's been, what are we going to do to do a safe event that's fun and effective with COVID restrictions that were developed back in March, but then obviously we're in a different phase in June in terms of what's legal locally and what people sort of temperament is around doing things. But then you also had you have riots and unrest and legitimate protests, whatever you want to call it, going on. So there's another safety angle to it. So we were good on the location, just kept coordinating with the Hendersonville Police Department, further restricted the area we were going to move in. So we were basically in this Greenway Park area, not very large. And we just made the call saying, hey, we're just pretty much going to stay there, even for the heavy, the entire time, so that we would not, be mistaken by anyone for being anything like a protest, or, you got a bunch of people running around, with military kit on, the military looking gear on, make sure people don't think we're like there for the boogaloo or whatever it is those guys are called, or Antifa. You just didn't want to have that happen. So we were, we set up the area of operations and our coordinations to maximize safety and minimize exposure to the outside world, so to speak. The other thing we did as far as safety leading up to the event is we encouraged people to start monitoring their health 2 weeks out. So taking a temperature, minimizing their own interactions with other folks, making sure they were being safe as possible so they're coming into the event healthy. If anybody felt sick or at all, concerned about their own health coming in, we encourage people, hey, no harm, no foul. GORUCK will refund your money or we'll give you a credit or whatever, but just make sure you're coming into the event healthy, because that to me was the best way realistically to minimize the risk from a pure COVID standpoint for people participating in a GORUCK event. And then we had, as far as what was required of the participants during the event, masks were on the packing list, but we basically let everybody know that, hey, that's an individual choice as to whether you're going to wear it or not, because especially for an HTL in hot weather, far bigger risk or equally a bigger risk to your health is going to be having a mask that's going to restrict your breathing. And every time I've had to have a 911 event at a GORUCK event has been when somebody it's been a heat related issue, or rhabdo, right? So the idea was, hey, look, if you want to wear the mask, you can, but it's entirely up to you. Safety is both a group responsibility, but an individual responsibility, and that's going to be your call. We had all the hand sanitizers and the fabric disinfectant. My wife works for Clorox, so we got some free stuff that was helpful. We used litters for coupons, which allowed enough distance. We just didn't allow the participants to put the litters up on their shoulders. So they had to do it at the low carry, and that kept enough distance between people, practically speaking, to use those. Overall, the feel was people really just were so excited to be back, to be able to do the events. They didn't really want to deal with a lot of the COVID restrictions. The real feel was, hey, we're here, we're adults, we understand what we've signed up for. We are going to be as safe as we can, but we don't want this to be, they don't want Cadre Kevin or Cadre Karen, COVID nagging everybody during the event. And so that's, we didn't do that, but I think definitely the sentiment was, look, we've had our fill of being locked down. We've done what we need to do. We're going to be as safe as we can be, but we're here to do that. We're here to do GORUCK events.
So I've got a bunch of questions that I'm
Sure.
excited to ask. So the first one is the space that you worked in. So you kept it to, like, how big of a space would you say that the event took place in? Because it sounded like you didn't want to, go too far, like you said, to be kind of for people to think that you're part of one side or another side or running some augment
You're probably
protest.
talking if from end to end, the greenway all the way through this park, and then there was a creek system that Cadre Hand had them in the water during when he was on shift for a good long while, moving back through a creek on their way back to the start point. You're talking about 2.5, 3 miles total end to end. And so, yeah, it was a pretty small space. It worked out. If in a different area, if we could have gone into the city, there's a lot more space to work with, even if you wanted to stay out of the city, the actual Nashville proper, in terms of like downtown or something. There's parks down in the area that we could have done the same thing, but we just had a lot more room to maneuver in. But we just were, just had made the call to stay out a good ways from the city. So it was small, and it did get, I know, speaking as a cadre, it kind of got, you start seeing the same turf over and over again. It gets a little old, but it worked out. We made it work. Had to do some loops and some, kind of doing laps and things like that. But but we were able, I think, to get, to create enough of a positive experience and a real feel of a heavy that it wasn't like a totally negative factor.
I think that's just a huge testament to the cadre that run the events and just the type of events that they are, because you're able to put this 24-hour event into the scope of, like what you said, 2.5 to 3 miles, and you're able to make those calls to bring it outside of the city and get it away from people. I mean, there aren't many events out there. I don't know if there actually are any other events out there that can be that agile. I mean, with something like Spartan Race, those big, you've built all these obstacles. You can't, you've built them all in one spot. You're not driving them somewhere else. It's tough to make calls like that.
You're absolutely right.
So I think that's really cool that you're able to look at all those factors and say, hey, this is where we're doing the event. It's going to be safer over here. We've got this area sectioned off that we're going to be doing it in, and we're going to make it work. And it sounds like you did.
Yep. Yeah. We were real lucky with the spot, and it is. You're absolutely right about it. That's one of the I think the core features of the GORUCK Challenge events is that they can be done almost anywhere, which means there's obviously the flexibility in a situation like we've just been through, but also that just inherently creates enough variability in variance and experience to make them interesting and fun to keep coming back to. So if you change the location a little bit, or the combination of location, cadre, and even how the cadre decides to approach any given event just makes it for an experience that can be different almost any time, which is again a core feature of the GORUCK the sort of the legacy challenge events.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people keep coming back. So the next thing I want to touch on is kind of the additional gear that's been added to the packing list. So since COVID kind of started and events have started up from there, we've got masks to minimum, gloves, working gloves have been added. I always thought those were a good idea to bring anyways, but now they're on there.
Yes.
And we've got hand sanitizer wipes. It says 1 bottle of Purell and then 1 package of baby wipes and equivalent. And it sounds like the masks are, use them if you want to, but they're not enforced. It's not a rule to have to wear them. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, the masks are optional, and then the gloves are, I agree. I think gloves should just be something people should bring, just because what can happen to your hands. As we emphasized during the event that, the key issue, whether you're cleaning a piece of equipment or if you're cleaning your hands or if you're wearing gloves or not, as best as we can tell, the two areas of, the risk of transmission are, like breathing or talking close to another individual, or touching, and even, that's the biggest one. And then to the extent that your hands are going to be an issue, it's touching whether you have a glove on your hand or a naked hand. It's when you're touching your face. So that's what you have to be conscious of. And so the sequence, if you're going to spend the time to clean something off, make sure that you're doing it in a way that's not, don't clean it and then fall out of sequence and end up doing something that it really isn't even worth it. Then you haven't really cleaned it, or you're contaminated again and you're touching your face. So we try to keep it really simple. Just be aware of touching your face, and don't be sitting there breathing on each other at super close quarters. So no sandbag transitions. That's why we had sandbags on the litters, but we did not do any individual sandbags carry or log carry, because that just puts people too long and sort of breathing on each other too close.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm obviously not a doctor. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not a virologist or whatever they're called. But, from what it sounds like, the real issues are occurring when people are in an enclosed area, breathing close to each other. And when you're outside, it seems like transmission is a little more difficult.
Yes. And I had, for a long while there, been following a lot of this very closely to see, okay, and obviously you can go completely crazy trying to keep up with everything. There's just, things have changed so much, even what data you look at and all the rest of it. It's hard to keep up, even if you're a epidemiologist, it's hard to keep up with it all. But to your point about being outside, it seems that, being outside in the open air, there isn't that much transmission. And even when you see instances of, it happening, it's happening not in the open air, but somebody's in a mosh pit down at the beach or something where they're all actually at a bar. It wasn't that they were out on the beach together. It's that they're at the bar afterwards, all breathing on each other for 4 hours. So we were, looking at it from that standpoint, as long as you're just not sitting there right next to someone breathing on them for an extended period, that you probably were keeping risk to an utmost minimum, given that everybody had been monitoring their health coming into the event, and that, a chance of somebody completely asymptomatic coming to an event's possible, but the risk was extremely low on that front.
I mean, that's just being a good neighbor anyways, right? Like, even pre-COVID, You shouldn't be breathing in someone's mouth, please.
Oh, I know, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and we didn't, of course, there's always the potential for cadre-induced proximity, and we just didn't do that. No tunnels of love, no buddy carries, and which I got to say, I've done buddy carries, but I'm not always a fan of them. They have their place, especially if you need to weigh the class down, or if you've got something where there's a practical exercise, casualty carries, things like that. I don't mind doing that as part of a training exercise, but just doing buddy carries to have buddy carries done, I'm not a huge fan of that anyway. So that was easy not to do.
It's funny that you bring that up because, I've been doing events since 2011, and I remember my first run of events. It seemed like at least at one point during it, there'd be 50-50 buddy carries where half the class is being carried. Everyone's carrying someone or being carried. And it seems like that's come down a little bit, where you don't see so much of the 50-50 anymore, but it's more, when you get some 20-80 where you've got, like 6 casualties and 16 people or 18 people, some of them carrying, different formations, and some of them carrying their stuff. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because I hadn't really thought about it, that you don't really see a lot of that 50-50 run to the finish line anymore.
Well, and again, I've done it sometimes. Sometimes I think historically it may have been also with the sort of Mogadishu Mile events. That at the end there's that last drag, so to speak. I do know that events that where I bring the weight, it's sandbags and GORUCK. My sandbag collection is pretty significant, and then when Cadre Cleve and I get together and do events, it can get obscene. No, just how much weight that we'll bring, which is something we get excited about, but you have to be careful with that too, because you don't want it just to be entirely about moving. How much extra weight per person can we have? That ends up being get a little old. But with those tools available, the buddy carry is not as necessary as a way of creating a coupon load for the group.
That makes a lot of sense, and I can already see you and Cleve having competitions on who can bring the most weight.
Well, there's been, I think the most at one time we've had 3 or 4 120s, then 80s, 7 80s that were filled up to hundreds, and maybe more. We've done that, which is a little nuts, but those are for HTLs. The thing about the sandbags is very versatile. Logs are nice where you can find them. But the thing at sandbags, you can do so many different things with them. You can, as a training aid, as just a pure coupon. There's just a lot of versatility if you get creative with them. That you can chain them together in different configurations and have a purpose to it as well. So you can approximate certain casualties. You can approximate carrying ammunition. You can approximate doing different things with them. So again, you don't need to use the buddy carry to do that. You've got a tool in hand that works very well and safer. There's also, one thing I think is a legitimate complaint, and we as Cadre can help alleviate the complaints. So it's partly our fault, but I've heard from some GRTs where they're primarily female, who are smaller, tend to always get picked to be the casualty. And I think they feel, which rightly so, is, hey, you're underestimating my ability to carry the heavy weight or a body. And two, that I'm always getting picked to get, carried around, which sounds like the easy job, but it's actually not. It kind of sucks being carried as a casualty after a while.
It's the worst.
So
Just bouncing there on
yeah,
your, the pack, the
yeah,
shoulder hitting you on the side. I
yeah,
would much rather carry someone than be carried.
yes.
It is an awful ride.
Oh yeah,
Unless you can find
yeah.
someone who's got a
So,
couch for shoulders.
yeah, exactly. And there aren't a lot of those around.
Nope. So I do have to ask this because I know someone's going to ask me. So the masks optional to wear at the event, but they are on the required gear list. So do you think that,
Yes.
It's recommended that everyone brings them? Because, there are cadre out there who you go through the gear list, and if you don't have something, you're in trouble. So bring it, or do you think it's more of like one of those optional items?
I would agree that being mindful of what's on the packing list is a safer way to go. I'm and every cadre is different. I'm not I look at the packing list as, do you have your key items that are critical to accomplish the mission safely? Like, do you have your weight? Do you have your water? Do you have your ID card? Do you have your headlamp? Do you have your reflector tape? Those kinds of things. And I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the rest of it. I mean, I'm looking for the critical items. That doesn't mean that other cadre are different. Like I'm not sometimes I'll say no watches, but I don't care about watches that much. Mainly because that's just my view is that, you can see, if you, especially in a city, you can see what, there's other sources of finding out what time it is. And also, if you were on a real hit and a real mission, you'd have a watch and you'd have time hacks and you'd be keeping them. But that's cadre preference. But I would say, yeah, bring the masks and everything on the packing list if you want to be sure that you're not going to get into trouble with another cadre who might be just, looking as an attention to detail training exercise to see if you brought the full packing list. I would say that just as a general note, so people and I think people can appreciate that this is a moving target for all companies and for all organizations about what is the best way to, what's the critical gear, what are the critical principles, what are the key practices in an environment where we're dealing with, we've got a virus out there that's going to be with us for a while. And in a lot of the measures we put in place were developed like that first weekend in March, or not the first weekend in March, but that event weekend in March when things ended up right before everything really shut down. So the one we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, and figuring out, what that looks like in 3 or 6 months, even the idea of what people, even just generally, what across the country, some states say you should be wearing masks outside all the time. Others are not. So what the best practice is for an event is probably a moving target. If there's an event in California, everybody may be bringing masks anyway, because that's what's required. Here where we were, it wasn't. And, we had the ability to kind of balance out safety considerations in total and come up with the best, no plan's perfect, but come up with the best plan to execute on that. And again, as I said, just having from my own experience doing, 120 plus events, restricting someone's breathing in hot weather, and it was hot. We actually did have to have someone for the light. It was very hot in the light. And we, had followed all the best practices. Somebody was a heat casualty for the light. And so they had to be evacuated. They ended up being fine, but my main concern with safety is not having people breathing restricted doing a GORUCK heavy and let alone the HTL. So, I'd say stick with the packing list. Long way of answering your question, but stick with the packing list and make sure you have what's supposed to be there. And then there's one less thing to worry about is the cadre running into some cadre is going to freak out that you don't have your mask with you.
Yeah, because no one wants to be that person, right? Hold up,
Right.
If you didn't bring the item that's 100 reps of whatever for the team, hold up your water. Everyone holds up their water. Hold up your mask, and then you're the only person with their hand down. No one wants to do that.
Right.
And I mean, I know that we're hitting up the end of our hour here, but it's really nice, hearing all of that from you, because GORUCK, I mean, they were really agile when this whole thing started. like you were saying, you were paying very close attention to the news. You're paying close attention to what's going on. You canceled events. GORUCK canceled events out here. Some events ran in other states, but then GORUCK completely shut down. Now they're coming back in certain states. And it's nice to know that they have that flexibility to kind of watch what's happening and, possibly shut events down again, possibly not, but knowing that they have the ability to make those decisions. So you ran that event a week and a half ago. Do you have any other events on the calendar coming up?
Yeah, well, I had an event next month in San Antonio, which I'm told is going to be canceled. I think they've announced that. I just realized maybe they haven't, but so I'm going to get a talking to. So that one just had low numbers. Then my next event is in August in Des Moines, which I think will go. And then I got 9/11 Milwaukee and another custom in Des Moines. And I think I had maybe getting the heavy in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure. But then the big one I've got, two big ones are in the fall. The double tough Day of the Ranger in DC, October 3rd. We've got almost 70 people already signed up. That's Cadre Igor and myself. He was another Mogadishu guy. He was actually a Delta guy, and he actually did his qualifying event. I was the cadre for that back in late 2018 in Annapolis. But he's obviously done a lot of events now, and he's honchoing that. So we're doing that in DC. That's a really big one. And then I'm doing the Badass Babes event so it's a tough light scavenger in Austin in November. A lot of people are signed up for that too. So those are the big ones I've got on the calendar. Not a lot of events this year, obviously, but happy to have the ones that I got and excited that what I would just encourage everybody to do is really, if you're in, if you've signed up for events or thinking about signing up for events in markets that, you feel comfortable doing them in, right? We're going to be taking every precaution, take every measure to make sure we're going to be locating the events in safe areas and doing all that we can to make sure the event is an exciting and safe experience. But I'd encourage people to sign up because at the end of the day, the events are the core. I think the events are core of what the GORUCK community is all about. And it takes people to sign up to do them, and if people don't sign up, eventually then the events kind of end up dying out. And I'm not saying I think that's going to happen because I know there's a huge commitment to keep it going from headquarters, but it really all depends on the community coming together and then making every opportunity that can happen.
It's nice to hear from you about all this because, it's been such a crazy past couple months, and I'm glad to hear that your calendar is, still somewhat full. Events are coming back. It's nice to see, and it's great to hear about the safety precautions you're taking.
I think it's going to be an evolving safety approach, but we're getting rest assured we're having regular discussions and conversations around how to best do this and how to make this happen. So
awesome. Well, Cadre Belman, thank you again for taking all this time out of your day to talk to me. I really appreciate this, and again, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for downloading the All Day Ruckoff podcast. This has been episode number 159. If you want links to anything we talked about during the episode, you can head on over to alldayruckoff.com/159. Again, I'm not an expert in any of this when it comes to health, viruses, doctor things, whatever. Not an expert, so I don't have an educated opinion on if events are safe to do or not. I just felt it was important that if you're thinking about doing an event, that you know what to expect. And if you want to help support the All Day Ruckoff podcast, you can always leave reviews on Apple Podcasts. You can also hit up the online store, alldayruckoff.com/store. And finally, you can support through Patreon, patreon.com/alldayruckoff. Links to all that in the show notes. I hope you're staying safe out there. Hope everything's going all right for you. Hope you're still able to get some training in. And I hope you're continuing to stay sane. As always, don't forget, attitude is everything. Keep yours positive. And thank you so much again for tuning in.